The history of earthworks is amazing. I mean, I am blown away. Like, I could basically just spend the rest of my life like traveling around and studying the history. I mean, I don't know about all you guys, but in my head, like when I think about earthworks, it's more of a modern approach, you know. And we know, you know, that people obviously have worked with the earth and they've built incredible things, but I don't know how many of you have really studied how broadly the earth has been worked with over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's incredible. And modern history and science and archaeology, you know, we've got this idea that agriculture kind of started in Mesopotamia and Egypt and kind of worked its way out. But now what they're discovering when they're dating some of these sites is it's much older than Mesopotamia, and it didn't just start in Mesopotamia. There's earthworks all over the world. So it's incredible. I mean, it's truly incredible. The Valley of Mexico, the Mayans fed so many people, and they did it by chinampas. Have you guys checked out chinampas? It's pretty cool. So they have these shallow lakes in Mexico where they would dredge up the mud and create these mounds. And they also have incredible, when you have these shallow lakes, there's lots of reed grasses and things that grow in them, and they're already super fertile. So what they would do is they would stake out their bed with sticks. They drive sticks into this mud, and then they would harvest reed grasses, put down, and then they would put the mud on top and then more reed grasses and keep building it up. And they would add willows to the edge, and they had one of the most fertile systems in the world. They were able to feed an incredible amount of people on small-scale agriculture. They were able to get 7 succession crops a season out of this. And then the water, they were able to, it was always moist, obviously, and they had an incredible amount of fish that thrived in here, and it was always fertile. Anytime they needed more fertility, they just dug in the lake here and added to it. So it's kind of a neat little system they had going here. Here's some of the archaeology of that, and there's a little bit of it left today, but not a whole lot. The Anasazi out west had incredible systems. Incredible systems. And these are harsh, harsh climates. So they didn't have a yearly flow of water that they could tap. You know, they couldn't tap groundwater. This was seasonal flow. They were able to collect seasonal rainfall, channel it in canals, and they made these basins, which they actually plastered, and they could grow blue-green algae in it. They would take the blue-green algae, it's high in all kinds of minerals, and nitrogen, phosphorus, and they would use it as fertilizer. So, and it's incredible. I mean, it's miles and miles and miles of canals. They had these mixing canals where the water would step down, and I don't have a picture of the kivas, but they had fermentation kivas also that they could, basically a big hole in the ground, and they could throw all kinds of stuff in there, even animal parts, what have you, ferment it, and then they had these gates they could open up, let water flow through it so it would mix it, and then they can open up a gate and have it fertilize their fields. So it's like incredibly advanced agriculture. And we really, like, there's just so much we don't know that we're just learning. I told you about the irrigation canals, but there were some irrigation canals that were hundreds of feet wide, you know, and these went miles and miles and miles. obviously no equipment. It was community-based, and they had to work together to do it. I'm crazy about the Peruvian aqueducts and all the work in Peru. These aqueducts are, older than what they have in Rome, and a lot of the areas they're still running. They still use it modern day. In Peru, they had, let me just get you guys to guess. See if you got any idea about how many hectares or acres in terraces at the high point of Peru they had going. Anybody got a guess? Just throw out anything, it doesn't matter.
2 million square acres.
Oh man, come on, keep it lower so I got something to shock you with. No. No, yeah, basically. Yeah. They had, over 2 million acres of terraces. Insane. And we just think terraces, but the terraces were so advanced because if you think about it, they would go from the very bottom of a mountain all the way up to the top, terracing it. And if you get large amounts of rain, if you deforest that whole area, that becomes landslide area. That's like very unstable. Well, they were able to make it stable. And what they did, and our scientists are just like starting to figure this out. What they did is every terrace, they built the walls in a specific way, but then they mixed the soil for every terrace. So it had sand, gravel, and clay and topsoil mixed in it in certain proportions, in certain layers. And so they were able to make them drain, but also incredibly enough hold water. It was like this weird kind of in-between place. Because what happens when you get a lot of rain is that you have clay, that rain, it expands the clay, and that's an incredible amount of pressure on the terrace walls. And these terraces are still standing there. They resisted all the pressure. So we're just learning about all this. But there are people that are coming into it that are rebuilding the canals because they would say you had a hillside. They would take a south-facing hillside and put their terraces on it. Well, they wouldn't necessarily have water on that hillside. So what they would have to do would be able to create a canal all the way around the mountain back to where the water was. And then they had to have ponds to impound that water to hold it there and use it to water. And what they found is when they excavate inside these terraces is one watering, they're still moist 6 months later. So it's just incredible efficient agriculture. It's like, I think with what we're doing and what we're trying to do, we might be getting back, not that we're there, but we're getting more productive and efficient on a small scale. But they really had it down. Yes?
In your research, have you come across Hookah culture?
Yes. I got a little bit of it in here. Yep. Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. I love Hookah culture. I think it's really got a lot to offer. So this man versus machine basically comes back to how much effort it takes to do anything. And, I know for me, I'm kind of romantic. I've got this romantic idea that we should be out there doing everything by hand and we shouldn't use any equipment. And we should be as sensitive as we can. And maybe we'll get a community of people and we'll build this up. But have you guys, probably most of you have dug in the earth, but how many have seriously dug in the earth all day long, in hard clay? Yeah, that's no fun, huh? Yeah. But most of us don't have, we couldn't do these big projects. If we had the close-knit community that it really depended upon, we probably could. But most of us don't have that community around us, and we just don't have that work ethic anymore. It's really hard to get out there and to want to, do something on a big enough scale where it's going to have an impact. So it basically comes down to kind of like man versus machine, you know? I mean, here I am out there working, you know, I'm shoveling. I mean, how much can I get done? I get a little bit done, but, you know, here's my son, Elwin. He's on the smallest piece of equipment that they have for rent, the smallest excavator. And him on the smallest excavator can do a whole heck of a lot more than I could in a day. So I think, you know, we've got to be super sensitive when we use equipment, but we're in a modern age where that's, it's very appropriate. It's appropriate technology. We can use it, get in there fast, really smart about what we do, repair the land, and start harvesting water, start growing plants, you know. So that's the smallest machine. And then here's one over at Grandview. I fast forwarded this, but look at this. This is crazy. That's over a yard scoop. Incredible amount of work. You know, a yard of clay, not only is it heavy, but it's super dense, it's compact. To be able to dig that out, you know, it's basically like Mike Mulligan. Like I could do as much work in a day as, I don't know what they say in the old book, Mike Mulligan, but you know, like 1,000 men or more, probably more than that in a day. So it's very appropriate, but you've got to be specific. You got to have a good plan. Any questions? Some people are concerned about the fuel that it burns. You know, it's diesel fuel, which I'm concerned about that also. You can use biodiesel in them, and I think in the future, I think we'll probably have battery-powered equipment. So I think it's only going to get better for us. Machinery has done a lot of damage on this earth, and broad scale, I think we're going to need it to do a lot of repairing on the earth. I'm just going to run through. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of some of the types of beneficial earthworks. So you have terraces. That's the Sacred Valley in Peru. That's still the most fertile area in Peru. Incredible. Look at that. Is that not crazy? Look at this slope. I mean, amazing. We wouldn't want to do anything like that nowadays. Because it's too labor intensive, all these hand placed stones, and we don't get, there's not a, I mean, they had to, that was where they lived, but this is appropriate for here because we have a lot of mountains, you know, that have been deforested, that we could build terraces on. Incredible. Here's Peruvian terraces. Here's this is more like, you know, what you're going to see at your house. Terraces, this doesn't show a lot of the good form, but, you know, here we have terraces, and then we have trellises. This is at a client's place. I've got blackberries, and these are just 2-year-old, but they're just going nuts here. And then there's grapes on these upper ones, and then fruit trees up here. Now this is my place. It's kind of hard to see, but I wanted to show you guys a couple things on here. This is really cool. You see all the lines? That's all your contours. Contour is a level line. So, you know, in the mountains, it's super steep. A level line, if you draw it out, it's not straight. It will go around a piece of land in a really curvy way. I mean, there's really no straight lines in nature. So my family and I bought this piece of land like 20 years ago. It's 8.39 acres, see it right there. And it was an old blueberry patch. And what they did was, here's all this beautiful old forest. What they did is they cut down the forest, harvested the timber, and planted blueberries out here. And they cut down the timber all the way up the hill here, but they only planted out this section right here. Can you see that? So what we did to cause less impact, and this is kind of like the black and white or the gray area, is this had regrown, but it was all brambles and pioneers, pines. You know, there was no old growth there. So we tried to position the house in the middle of that, well, on the edge of the forest here, but in an area that we would have to impact it the least amount. And this is running downhill. This is a super steep piece of land. And we started out hand terracing right here. You can barely see that in this photo. But we've got terraces here, 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 and a few here in this piece, in that slide. That's a few years old. I've got an updated one. So this is kind of looking off the house. It's not the best picture, but it was about the only thing I could round up. This is kind of like little farmsteady, you know, some outbuildings, goats and chickens, and we were building this crazy straw bale chicken coop, spaceship kind of structure. Pretty cool, huh?
What's your roof?
What's that?
What's your roof?
Clay tile.
So what determines how many contours you decide to put on a hill? The steepness, the angle, how much you want to capture?
You can collect too much water on a hill to where you can destabilize this. So in our area, you know, we have, well, in Mills River here, there's 49 inches of rain a year. I'm in Zirconia, you know, we get a little bit more. There's like 57 or something like that. So it's not a huge, hold on one second. That's a good amount of rain, but it's not a huge amount of rain. In the tropics, you know, they might get 4, 5, 6 times that amount of rain. So that all these terraces collect water, and that can cause a landslide. So basically, I can't answer your question just short. It's basically you want to have an exit plan for the water, and you want to stabilize the slope with trees, and you know, there's a lot to it. But you want to limit the size. You definitely do.
Could you refresh my memory on the rise and the run when you're doing terraces like that? There's a formula, but I don't quite remember how that works, about how you determine what your placement.
Mostly it depends on your slope. So, you know, slope like this, you can do nice wide terraces. You know, when you get a steeper slope, you're like that Peruvian terrace picture, you know, that was like 60% grade or something crazy. So that kind of, it's all about your slope. You can only have it as wide as you can make it. The wider you make it, the higher the drop, basically.
What's your elevation?
It's about 2,400 feet.
And does that determine what you're able to do as well? I'm in Boone, so we have high elevation.
You have high elevation, yeah. That determines that. Well, that'll determine not so much with the earthworks, but what you're going to plant on it. Yeah. So, but you've got plenty of season. You've got all kinds of possibilities. Our climate's it's you know it's fairly harsh, but where some of the earthworks on the planet have been installed, I mean we're nowhere near, you know, the Andes. And go ahead.
Some ways to mitigate the actual retention of the water. So if you're terracing it, you say you don't want to destabilize it by collecting too much water. But if you need to terrace it to kind of reclaim that land, how would you mitigate the retention?
You basically see these little runs here. These are basically paths, and they're lower than the beds, than the terrace bed. It's hard to see in this picture. I wish I had a better picture here. But your terraces actually, the water coming down the hill and it hits a terrace. The terrace is not shaped like this to where it lets water come off the front of it. What it's actually, you want to tilt it back a degree or two, back towards the mountain, and then you want that water to run off to the sides. So you can actually stop the water on the ends if you want and collect, a few inches in that trough space. It kind of creates a swell in that trough space. But then you want to have a way for that water to overflow. We've got it on our sides here.
You'd be overflowing it down in some type of path versus taking it to the next.
You can take it to the next one, but eventually, it has to come out, and you want it. It'd be awesome if you could take it down and then run it to a little pond or something like that. You could also, either you can get really creative. I mean, you can run it off the edges. You can run it in a culvert, and then run it down to the next one, or run it out to the side. But it's basically like we're trying to slow the water down, let it soak into the landscape, hold it as long as we can, and then if we have a pond, let that pond fill up and be able to recycle it on the land. Yes?
Does money kind of depend on, like you said before, like what you're working with, the slope and the hillside and everything, but at what point is too much?
Too much terracing?
Yeah, when you said...
Yeah, you don't want to have too much area. You probably like I'm just throwing this out there because it's going to be broadcasted later on. And in permaculture, we work with all the major climates. Tropical zone, you want to limit it because you get way more rain. So maybe you would have a series of 4 terraces, maybe not more than 4 or 5% of the given area around it. In our area, you can do 30%, something like that. But that's just kind of a rough. Here, we can get away with a lot more. And then you can mitigate it. But it's basically trees, planting trees on it. So this is pretty cool. This is, we did all these little hokey pokey buildings and cool things, and that was really fun. But then I really got into permaculture design, and now, now this has all been redone. None of this structure's still there, but none of these are still there. And then this has been terraced out more. The road's been changed. You really want to have that broad understanding, so you don't do stuff and do it 2 or 3 times. It's kind of cool. Like, this is straw bale, and then some timbers for the rafters, and we ended up building a Hookah mound up here, and basically most of it went into the Hookah mound. So it's kind of cool. Here's that same terrace. You've got bed space, and this is planted out with perennial herbs, and then fruit trees. Fruit trees here. And then it's hard to see, but there's a trough area. So basically, our beds are higher than our paths. The trough, the water collection, is our paths, so we don't compress the beds. The beds are here, and then the slope is below that. So that was the old blueberry patch. The old blueberry patch, after like 30 years, was not productive anymore. And we didn't maintain it as well as it could have been. Trees grew up in it. And it was a mess. And then we had like crazy infestation of chiggers, as a side note. Like, you couldn't get out there without getting eaten up with chiggers. So the whole thing was, none of it was terraced, and it's this steep slope, especially up here. So I ended up terracing it. Here's my wife here, but you can kind of see how big some of these are. This is like huge, and this is an access road, and basically, here it is with some ground cover. You see the slope. You can kind of see the slope going back into the bank here, where it sheds water around it and then down, around it and down. Even the road, you want to do that. You want to have a crown on the road or you want it sloped. So here's a more modern, updated version. I think it's 2015. Like looking at, here was the old blueberry patch, and this is spun around compared to that other slide. But here's the old blueberry patch. The old road used to go straight up the hill here. It was so freaking steep, and we had so much water running down it. I mean, it was a mess. And so what I did was a plan on it and contoured it. It's all about contours. It's about, all this is level contour land. And this doesn't represent it well, but there's a little pond right here. I've got a little pond at the top of the hill. And there's a pond right here. In this picture, doesn't have any water in it yet. And you can't see it, but there's a little pond right here. So it's just working with your land creatively, figuring out, you know, what you can do with it, having as many little pocket ponds as you can. And especially roads are so important because there's very little infiltration with the road. You know, it's compacted, it's compressed, and water is basically funneled down the hill through a road. And even if you have ditches and you have a nice crown and ditches, you still have a lot of funneling effect that adds up. So what I did was bring this more on contour, and I was able, now I could actually access this whole area, swings back, I can access this area, and it goes up. And so there's more access. The road is longer, but there's more access now on the flat. It's kind of neat. You know, here's some buckwheat. This was just a recent picture of some of the terraces with cover crop. We already talked about most of this, but important points with terraces is it can destabilize the hillside. We don't have that as much in this area as higher rainfall areas, but you really want to think about putting trees in between. So you can have, and it works awesome on terraces because you can have your flat production area where you can do annual production, or you can put perennials there also, but you have the steep areas where you can put trees. You can put perennial trees. And that'll just basically grow in, stabilize the hillside. It's kind of like this net space. It's almost like extra space because it's hard to use. Trees love it. You can't do a whole lot with it. You don't want to have to try to grow annuals in that area. It's steep. It's hard to get up. Yes?
Do you plan the specific growth or height that tree is going to reach in maturity? Or is that a problem where it could actually shade?
It could. It could. You definitely want to think about that. On our piece of land, I don't have to worry about shade. Not only did I do everything wrong, we got basically a piece north sloping. So, interesting. So I don't really have to worry about shading it too much, but luckily we're at the top of the ridge here to where we get plenty of sun anyways. But yeah, you definitely want to think about height-wise. You can do lower trees, you can prune the trees, you can do smaller, you can do shrubs, you can do nut trees, different things that don't grow as high. And then you can coppice them or pollard them, which is basically an ancient art of growing a tree up, either cutting it at the base and letting it resprout, and then you're cutting it, and then you let that grow, and then that could be your fuel, or, they do all kinds of stuff with them. They actually can make cuttings with willow and just stick them in the ground. They'll sprout different things. Or pollering, which is higher. So you cut it a little bit higher and then it sprouts out. And it's the same basic effect, except it's up out of your way.
What did you use to determine the contour lines and precision equipment? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to go into that, but we'll just go into it right now. If you're just in a very small area, you can even use a level. You can even use a 4-foot level and kind of mark it out. A lot of times what these guys do is they make an A-frame with a pendulum, and then you can walk this A-frame around and kind of get your contours. But, we're in the modern day here. I'm all about let's use the best technology. So I'm all about the laser level. Because water is very specific. It's like, You're off. Yeah, you're off. And you can either borrow one, rent one. They even have small ones you can buy. You don't need a super expensive one that don't cost that much on a little tripod. So you can rent a really good laser level for a day for probably like $50. So I think it's just worth not using the A-frame, not worrying about all that. Just use a laser level. And usually you've got a friend that you can borrow one from, a builder, somebody you could borrow it from. Trees in between, and then like worrying about excessive water infiltration. That's basically your important points with that.